Welcome aboard, whether you've got here by accident or on purpose. Whether you're kidnapped and held hostage and waiting for someone to pay the ransom, you have reached Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations, where we help people explode into their lives through full impact mindfulness. We're looking for people who want to create themselves rather than find themselves. The only requirement is the honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to try. If you're welcome nowhere else, you're certainly welcome here. Let the adventure begin. My name's Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist, and today we're joined by a really anticipated guest, Mr. David Pohl, an artist and illustrator of some renown. David, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Jim. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so if you had to give an accounting of yourself, if you were captured by aliens and you were the only representative of the human race, and you had to, first of all, tell how you represented the human race, what would you say?
I'd say, first of all, I love my fellow humans, or try to most of the time. I'm a creator. I'm someone who kind of enjoys processing life and then sharing my experience with others through my artwork, whether that be visual art or musical art or I'm a musician as well as a visual artist.
Well, and up on the
That's it.
screen right now, David, we're looking at various expressions, presentations that you've made. And if someone wanted to view your illustrations or find out more about you, how would they do that?
My website is davidpohl.com, Pohl, and I also have an Instagram account called House of Painting, Pingting, and that's where I share like a lot of my work, a lot of my life I share online. I've been posting online since 2005,
Wow.
just about every day almost. When I first started posting images online, it was almost like that was my daily devotion. I kind of used it as an altar where I put my intention or I put something that was like really significant to me that day up online. It was really very very intentional back in that at that time. I mean, I think it still is, but it was at that time it was very almost like a prayer or something.
Okay. Well, again, we're viewing a lot of your work on the screen here, and it seems to be pretty eclectic. What would you call your style, David?
Well, my illustration style right now is I'm a collage artist primarily. I think primarily my work is about collage. It's about finding something like a scrap or a fragment or a piece of something that already exists in the world, and then kind of like using that as a starting point or an inspiration for the piece. So when I first started doing illustration, I was doing like three-dimensional found object painting and sculptural work, and then the work was being photographed for my clients, and I'd send the clients a final photograph was the final piece. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, I started working digitally, and I could see where that whole thing was heading. So I started to work digitally, and I mean, I'm a graphic artist. Like my work is it's very graphic. Um, it's about being read very easily. I'm influenced by mid-century modernism, um, and I'm really influenced by Van Gogh a lot as a colorist. Especially his color palettes are just always gorgeous to me.
Okay. So for many people, I love this in a movie. I think I saw it once where a person stopped and they said, I'm trying to get to such and such a place, and could you give me the directions?" And their answer was, "Oh, you can't get there from here. However, you got here from there." So we always like to hear about these type of stories to how people got here from there. So what was there like, David?
Um, well, I I think it started early for me. I mean, I wanted to be an artist when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Um, I was always influenced by art even as a really young child. Some of my earliest memories have to do with looking at visual art. One of the first things I remember drawing was Snoopy,
Ah,
and I was really influenced by Charles Schultz as a kid, just the way he drew and just the characters in his comic strips. I was kind of a Snoopy crazy kid. I had Snoopy everything in my bedroom. Um, I also love Dr. Seuss books, and was really influenced by the color and the craziness of those books. I think the rhythm, the musical rhyming of Dr. Seuss, you know. Um, so I wanted to be an artist when I was 8 or 9 years old. My grandfather was an artist. I have some of his paintings in my house, um, and I never met him. He died in 1959 or
mm,
58, I think. But I wasn't born until 63. So I never met him. But my grandmother told me, I remember very early in my life, I was probably 11 or 12, my grandmother looking at my fingers at her kitchen table and telling me I had long fingers like my grandfather and I was going to be an artist like my grandfather someday.
ah.
Um, so I had that. I had, I mean, I think all kids have creative talent. Everybody, I've taught art, and around 8 or 9 years old, every kid is creative and every kid's kind of bursting with creative energy. And then it starts to get kind of squashed out of them, you know?
Tell me more about that, David, because one of our primary focuses here, and one of my absolute projects that I get on my pedestal about, is that particularly young ladies begin to lose their self concept and self esteem around the age of 9 years old. So tell me more about that. That's of great interest to us.
Well, I think what happens is, from my experience in teaching, is I don't know, it's that time in life when you start to become like self-conscious, you become aware of what others think of you. You know, up until that age, maybe you don't really think so much about what other people are thinking about you or of you. You want to be liked, you want to be friends with people, you know, you want to be popular, maybe, I don't know. But so it's around that time when you know, you watch kids draw, and they're like, when they're 8 or something, they're just so like zoned into their work, and they're drawing without looking around. They're just like totally focused on their own work. And then around 10, 11, I've noticed that the kids, they start looking around to see what the other kids are doing and comparing themselves, and they're like, oh, my work looks stupid, you know, my work looks dumb. And I don't know, something, it's like a filter, self-filtering process that happens, you know.
So when you were teaching, and some you looked at somebody's work and says, "Hey, that's I like that," and they would offer a disparaging comment about themselves, saying, "Oh, this isn't any good. Oh, it's stupid." How would you answer that, David?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, I think I always tried to encourage them, and tell them, oh, that's not true, you know, or like, I like what you're doing. I think I would say that, you know, I like what you're doing. Or I would ask them why they don't like it, why they're saying that.
Yes, yes. Quite often, if someone comes to us and says to me and says, "Oh, I'm stupid," "Oh, I'm this," "Oh, I'm that," what I'll say to them, I'll say, "Convince me,
Yeah.
convince me that it's bad, convince me that you're dumb, convince me." So 8 or 9 years old. So what interests were you developing back then? Around 8 or 9, if you can remember.
Well, I was really into records, 45s, and music, and I was really into drawing and comic books
Ah,
and television. I watched a lot of TV, the Flintstones and Saturday morning cartoons,
okay.
Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner.
Oh
I used
boy.
to get up before anybody in my house on Saturday morning, like even before my father. Like, it'd be pitch black outside, and I would like, I couldn't wait to go down and watch cartoons.
So that was a ritual of many people
Yeah.
a few years ago, the Saturday morning block of cartoons. Tell us about comic books.
Well, I was into Mad Magazine,
Ah,
and I used to read Archie comic books, and I liked Superman. Um, I didn't really get into like the superhero comics very much. I think I liked Archie comics because it was like older kids, and maybe I was imagining what it was like to be a teenager.
yes.
Um, you know, through that lens of, it was definitely, and I was kind of aware it wasn't really like, I mean, I think it was current, but I was even aware then that it was like a 50s or something, milk shops, milkshake shops, you know, and hamburgers and fries and stuff like that. That's where they hung out, you know. Um,
Well, it was
but I
certainly a
was really
different.
into Mad Magazine, and I think
Ah,
that's where I got my sense of kind of like cynicism a little bit and sarcasm and like that the world was a joke at time. I mean, I definitely went through a phase in college where I was just everything was a joke.
the characters that they had and the scenes and the drawings and the illustrations. Dave Berg, it was just fantastic.
Yeah, it was, and I loved Spy versus Spy, and
Oh
I
yeah.
loved the send ups of just movies and TV shows from popular culture, making fun of those things. So I started reading Mad Magazine when I was about 9 years old, maybe 10 years old, and going up to the local, walking up the street to the local uh, drugstore to pick a, get a comic book.
That was
That
great. It
was the
was
thing.
kind of like the old National Lampoon that magazine that used to be
Yeah.
available. Very very good. So you had more of a creative type of maybe did you have a cynical view of the world, kind of a satirical type of because that's kind of where Mad Magazine went.
Well, when I was little, I think I didn't understand a lot of the sarcasm, or I mean, I appreciated it. I thought it was funny, and I knew that it was kind of edgy, or it was like a little bit. It's like looking at the world through a cracked lens or a warped lens or something like that. Um, but I think like later on in life, when I began to get a little bit more cynical about the world, and just thought it was all bullshit, because I definitely went through that. I definitely went through that phase. Um, and I think that had that was part of the seed that was planted in my head as a kid.
Did you receive encouragement and support? Who was your mentor? Who gave you the encouragement and support?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I think my family was very supportive, but they were also, especially when I was in college, I didn't get a lot of support in the sense of like everyone doubted that I could do it, or like, what are you going to do, to make a living? How are you going to make a living? What are you going to do? Kind of thing. But I put myself through school. Um, so I went to Kent State University to study graphic design and illustration, and um, and then I dropped out after 2 years because I wanted to be a painter, and I took a year off, and then when I went to the Cleveland, I enrolled in the Cleveland Institute of Art, and I did very well there with scholarships and things. The It was a 5-year program, so
Wow.
my third year I got a half tuition scholarship. My fourth year I got a half tuition scholarship, and my fifth year I got a full scholarship.
Hmm.
And then I received a $4,500 traveling scholarship when I graduated. So I went to Europe for 6 months after that and
Wow. Quite
traveled.
quite
Um,
generous.
but I guess because I was putting myself through school, I just did what I wanted to do. I was paying for it. And it was
Yes.
hard. I mean, I didn't get. I mean, I have to say, I mean, my parents were always supportive, um, and they bought me art supplies, and but they also were doubtful. And that's just at the time, maybe it was more painful to me at that age. But I understand that. You know, I mean, I even sometimes feel today like, wow, what? Because I've taught in colleges and stuff like that, and sometimes I think, wow, it's really hard to be an artist, and why do you want to do this?
So when you told people, what are you going to do? Well, I want to be an artist, or some people would say, I want to be an actress, I want to be an actor, I want to be a painter, I want to be a sculptor, I want to be this. And then they would say, well, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Yeah,
What are you going to do to put gas in your car?
yeah. Well, I mean, I have made a living as an artist now. This
Yes.
will be my next year will be my 30th year,
Wow.
and it doesn't mean it's sometimes hard to fill up the tank. That's for sure.
How did you deal with the skeptics? How did you deal with the doubters? Probably
Well,
some of them maybe even been in your own relatives.
yeah, there were people definitely in my little family circle. I think that, um, I mean, I don't know. I've always had a strong belief in myself, and I don't really know where that comes from. But I know, I mean, I definitely think that it came from the outside. It came from when I was in seventh grade. My grandmother sent me to the Art Institute to take a class at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh in cartooning.
Uh-huh.
And I was like 13 or something, and I was there with adults. like everyone was over 18. Some of them seemed like they were, really old. They were probably 32, but
Uh-huh.
but I think I was like, I realized that my work could kind of compete with that level, or I was as good as them, and
Mm.
I got some praise for that or something. I mean, praise goes a long way when you're young, getting someone to say that your work is good or you're talented, or. And so, I mean, I won an art show in seventh grade. I had
Mm.
an art teacher in seventh grade who was really supportive of my cartooning and gave me a lot of encouragement. And so I think that was a big thing for me, was just like outside of my family, I had a lot of support from people, and like, quote, the real world or whatever.
So that boosted your self-concept, that
Yeah,
boosted your self-esteem.
for sure.
Okay. So when we deal with people, we work on self-concept, which is facts and information you know about yourself, self-esteem, which is how you interpret that, and identity formation. So let's talk about David Pohl and his identity formation.
Yeah, I think I matured late. I think I held on to my childhood for a long time. Um, I think I was very naive. Um, and then I think that when at that age, when in high school, I mean, I was really kind of awkward. I was very shy. I was very shy in high school. Um, but I had a couple really close knit, couple really close friends, and I think I could relate to those friends, and I had a friend who I'm still very good friends with, who we were kind of like Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn or something.
Ah,
We had adventures together in high school. We did crazy things, really, involving drinking and
mm-hmm.
driving, doing stupid things. Um, but like, I guess, that was part of it, I think. I really think a lot of my identity was through my work, that like when things were messed up or whatever, I always found a place to go to like shut the world shut the world off and like return to my center or something. Like work my work's always been like that to me, just drawing and working, and um so that's really been a huge part of my identity formation.
So you had a foundation, you had a center on which you could stand and grow from.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's great. Well, quite often what we give people the thought, the concept. Usually, when I deal with people, I tell them about the first or second time we're together. I say, "Here's the deal: we're spiritual beings. We're having a human experience,
Hmm.
and life is absurd." And
Yeah.
I tell them after they grasp those three things, kind of our work's done.
I've heard that quote before. I love that quote, actually.
Uh,
We're yeah, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I love that quote. My father went through AA, and so I'm familiar with the 12-step program through my father. And my father and I had later in life. My father and I had a very strong connection spiritually.
ah,
Um, I was doing a lot of meditation and yoga practice in the late '90s and early 2000s, and my father was really interested in talking about spirituality with me. So, I gave him Joseph Campbell books to read, and
cool.
um, I talked about Alan Watts. Alan Watts was a kind of
Yeah.
big influence
Uh
on
huh.
on me. Um, I used to listen to his Sunday night programs on WDUQ. Do you remember
No.
those
Yeah.
shows?
I remember those. I've listened to quite a few lectures by Ellen Watts.
Yeah.
Well, your father was a 12 stepper?
Hmm.
Great. Well, that's what the 11th step as says, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And I believe that's kind of a mission statement for the 12 step world. Cool. That's really wonderful. So you graduate from college and then you come out and you face the world. Tell us about that.
I have to say, I definitely think that winning that traveling scholarship money changed my life. Because right after college, I wasn't thinking about getting a job and settling down in any way at all. I was just thinking about traveling and seeing the world. And so I went to Europe, and I had spent a semester in New York City in 1986. And I had a couple friends who were in this program, and it was like each art school around the country. There was this group of art schools affiliated, and they each sent one or two students to represent the school, and it went to New York. So we lived at the YMCA on 34th Street, and I got an internship at this Holly Solomon Gallery, which was this really swanky art gallery across from Trump Tower
Ah,
on Fifth Avenue, like Bergdorf Goodman and Saks. And it was really, it was the 80s. It was just gold and brass and wealth everywhere. And I was living in a room at the Y that you could touch with both hands. When you laid in your bed, you could touch both
mm,
walls. Um, and it was pretty, it was pretty divert, like pretty extreme kind of reality, like spending my days in in, in that really wealthy environment, and then going downtown. We had studio space to paint and work. So New York in '86 was very different than it is now. It was pretty gritty still, um, and I don't know, that kicked me in the butt a lot. I mean, I was scared out of my mind half the time because it was, you had to be kind of like on your toes. It was a violent place. There was a lot more crime, and it was a little bit scarier certainly than it is now, I think. But like I loved it there. I loved the energy of the city. I went to the art museums all the time. It really like clicked something in me, like, and so when I graduated, I just wanted to go out and see stuff. And mostly I spent my time in Europe in museums. I went to so many museums.
wow.
So that was like almost like another education after school. And so when I came home from that, I was fortunate that a friend of mine had a dad who was an architect, and he had bought this old house in Shadyside, and he was going to fix it up. So he let us live there for free while, before he was going to do anything to it. And it was pretty run down, and we loved it. We painted, and we could spill paint on the walls and everything. So I lived there, and I was telemarketing for the Carnegie Museum.
Oh, okay.
And that was an interesting job. I believed in the museum and the mission of the museum, so I could do that. I could sell people museum memberships because it was something I really believed in. And then I started to do some illustration work. I got published in Pittsburgh Magazine.
Mm.
I really connected to the art director there, who was a painter himself, and was, like, had this kind of graphic design job. He just had some kids, and but he was an artist and a musician and a painter, and we just really related to each other. And so I started getting a little bit of work there, and then my father, who told me this years later, I think my father didn't want me to leave Pittsburgh, and I think my father thought that I would leave Pittsburgh
Ah,
because I never really imagined I would spend my life here. So I have a friend who's a real estate agent. My best friend, who I told you about, the Huck
yes.
Finn Tom Sawyer relationship, his name's Bob. His father was a real estate agent, and I was looking to rent a house because my friend who I was living with was getting married, and he had a crazy story. He got shot in the head
Hmm.
and fell in love with his rehab nurse,
Ah,
and they got married, and they had a child. But so anyway, my friend Bob's father was showing me around in this neighborhood where I live now, and he was showing me a house for rent, and he said, there's a house up the street for sale, and you could buy it and rent the first floor because it's rentable. You could live upstairs, and they would pay your mortgage. And I was like, I don't have any money to buy a house. I was working part time at Pittsburgh Magazine at that time. I was. This was a couple years later after the telemarketing, and doing a little bit of illustration. And so my father, I think wanted to. I think it was part of, like, he wanted to just maybe guarantee that I'd stay here, and also like help me out. So he loaned me the money to buy the house, and the house was nothing. It was only $21,000 for the house, and he loaned me the money to put the down payment down, and I paid him back and he co-signed for a mortgage, and I bought this house when I was 28. And
ah,
I felt very immature. I felt like I wasn't ready to own a house or anything, but I loved having all the space, and I loved having a place to work and live. And so now it's 30 years later, and I'm here, still here. And um, so so that, but I think getting back to your question though, like having this house and knowing that I didn't have to move, because I had moved like once a year for 10 years or something like that. And just having that ground and having that stability, I was ready to kind of just, settle in a little bit. Because I did have a crazy 10 years of life, just a lot moving around a lot, and a lot of adventure and a lot of stuff. Um, and it enabled me to just kind of like really work on my art. And but then right when I bought this house, the house I was living in was robbed and I lost all this stuff.
Ah,
And then I moved in and I lost my job the same month I bought the house. So I moved into this house without a job. And I had been doing some freelancing and the freelancing money was very good. And I got a job that January that was like basically like 3 months worth of income that I would have made if I had my job at Pittsburgh Magazine,
hmm,
which was just like a minimum wage, a little bit above minimum wage job or
sure.
whatever. So, so I think that made me think, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do this for a living. So I didn't have a plan to be an illustrator. It just kind of happened, and then I started to really pursue it. Like, okay, this is what I want to do. So this is what I'm going to focus on.
It sounds like you've had a tremendously well-rounded experience, and nobody just hatches and arrives. Nobody. I've heard the term uh, 20-year overnight success. Um when people arrive on the scene, when they
Yeah,
write a book, maybe they have a song that's popular or a play or whatever, and they say, "Wow, how does it feel to be an overnight success?" And I heard an interview once, and this person says, "Yeah, I'm a 20-year overnight success."
right. Yeah, it's always like that. It is. One of the first big jobs I got very early on in 1991 was for the Atlantic Monthly.
Hmm.
That was, a major national publication,
Yeah.
and
So
I felt like I felt like I had arrived at that point. And little did I know that, like, that doesn't mean anything really. You just, it's just a client you had, and then you still have to find like I still have to find clients all the time. I'm still working to find new clients all the time, and just it's easy. It's not easy to get there, but it's hard to stay there. You know what I mean? It's hard once you arrive. Then you have to like stay there and try to hold your space, and that's really hard.
well, you get to get complacent. You can a person can get complacent, and sometimes they get an elevated sense of themselves. I don't know whether that ever happened to you or not.
Mm, it's I don't know if it's not so much complacency as it. I think for me, I realized at some point I wanted to do more than work. I wanted to do more. I wanted to like I wasn't enjoying work after a while. Like about 5 or 6 years in, when I was doing 100 jobs a year, and I was just working 13-hour days every day, and
Nah.
you know working for magazines and newspapers, especially back in the 90s before the email and the computers, you had to overnight the artwork to the client, and you might get a call, and have 7 hours to read the story, come up with an idea, make the art, have it photographed, and send it to FedEx, like in one 7-hour thing. So it was kind of stressful, and it was a lot of work, and I think I just wanted to do other things, and so I kind of, I explore. I'm a person who explores a lot of different things. So I was in a band for a while,
Yeah, tell us
and
about that. That's great.
yeah, I started playing in this band because I always like I played the drums as a kid. I took drum lessons, and there was definitely a time in my life when I wanted to be a musician in high school. And you know, one thing I think was I wished I could go back and my guidance counselors basically told me, well, you have to make a choice. You can't be an artist and a musician.
Hmm.
And that's not true. But back in the day, I think they just basically wanted you to just choose one thing, and but I really thought maybe I wanted to be a musician too, and I kind of had to decide between art and music. And I think at the time I chose art because that was something I felt like I could do by myself. And musicians, you have to be in a band or be in an orchestra or whatever. Um, but anyway, so I just decided that yeah, I wanted to play music again, and I answered a classified ad in the Pittsburgh city paper,
Hmm.
um, and auditioned, and I got into this little country band, this sort of alt country band. I was playing snare drum, And then we were at another gig, and I met these other musicians in this other band, and they were playing this really experimental kind of funky music with a didgeridoo player,
Ah,
uh, and a really great poet singer. And those guys are all really still doing their art. They're making music. They're doing art. Um, so that was a great experience. The band was called Soma Mestizo, and there's some videos on YouTube, and
ah,
I think some of the records are even on Spotify now. Um, and yeah, so I played in the band. We were really busy. We played like 90 shows one year,
hmm,
which is a lot. That's like, two a week, um, around
okay.
2000.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So how did that shape your art?
Well, I think it shaped my art in a way that it gave me a break from my art, actually.
Ah, okay.
Um, because that was like around, I had a crazy thing happen where I burned my hand really badly in a fire. I used to paint with wax, and I had a wax fire. Uh, the I was melting it on the stove, and it caught fire, and I accidentally, like, instead of just turning the fire off and letting it go the stove off, I picked it up, and the lid took the lid off, and the oxygen hit it, and it went, you know.
Oh,
And so I was holding this pot of fire in my hand, and I mean, this was about 10 seconds worth of time, but during this time I thought, okay, if I drop this pot, I'm going to set my house on fire, because it's wax, and it's like petroleum wax. It's going to just splatter everywhere, set the house on fire. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just take it outside the kitchen, down the hall, and throw it out the back door, which is what I did. But it was kind of like my hand was on fire for about 10 seconds.
ah,
The skin just literally just came off. I had a third-degree burn.
oh,
My poor little dog got burned, spilled some wax on him. Um, and then I had a skin graft, and the the doctor told me that he didn't know if I would ever be able to use my hand again, and I'm right-handed, and it was my right hand. So, the long story short is that the drumming actually was really good therapy for my hand. I think the movement. I wore this like skin tight glove for a year, and I did a lot of like stretching the skin, like this.
okay.
I couldn't move it like more than that, and I did a lot of stretching of the skin. But I think like the motion of playing the drums, like the way you hold a drumstick, I think it just brought a lot of blood circulation to the hand. I
Okay.
think it helped it heal.
So you're
Um,
experienced in pain.
oh, that was crazy pain. I mean, I never experienced any kind of pain like that before. And I feel like if, I was in the burn care unit for 5 days,
Mm,
and there were people in there who had, you know, 80% of their body was burned, and mine was just a small area. I can't imagine that kind of pain.
mm,
It was
okay.
so, they left a staple in. That's how like my skin was, my flesh, it was like a piece of raw meat. And they left a staple in, and I didn't even see it for a couple of weeks. That's how like it's just like,
Ah,
um yeah, it was that was a crazy story. I was doing a lot of yoga and meditation at that time, and I was doing Kundalini Yoga, and I was doing very intense meditation practice. And I'm convinced that if I hadn't have been doing that at that time, I wouldn't have had the mental strength to to deal with the pain for as long as I did.
mm,
I was just kind of like, I can do this. I can do this. I know it's just, I can do it. Like, just very focused. I was doing this Kundalini yoga practice. I don't know if you do you know about Kundalini yoga at
yes.
all? Yeah. So I had done a Kundalini yoga, had an experience out in New Mexico. I went to the ashram in northern New Mexico, and they did this thing called white tantric yoga. There was a whole week of yoga, but 3 intense days of yoga where you would do like these practice. You'd have your hands up in the air, and you'd have a partner, and you'd look in their eyes, and you would stare at them and chant for 60 minutes with your arms up in the air. And I remember the first day of that, and I just thought, there's no way. Like, I remember what was going through my mind, and thinking, there's no way I'm going to hold my arms up for 60 minutes. It's like, it's 4 minutes and I am in agony, you know? and, and then somehow the, the, the meditation, the chanting, the whole practice of everyone around you doing it, it just like lifts you up and it sustained you. And I definitely had a kind of a, at the time I didn't know what had happened to me, but I actually felt like I had taken psychedelic drugs, which I had done.
Hmm.
Um, and, but I was, just from meditation and yoga practice, I felt like I had taken psychedelics.
Okay, so you
Uh,
felt connected with something.
yeah, it was a very, very much like a godlike experience. Or, I mean, I had a hallucination in the desert where I saw a body of water. And I remember looking at the trees and they were vibrating, like they were breathing,
Yeah,
like that sense of oneness and everything is connected. And it was very beautiful, but it was a little scary at the time because I didn't know when I was going to like come down from that. And, um, and I later, years later, that was in 2000 or 98, that was, um, I have a lot of mixed feelings about Yogi Bhajan, a lot of mixed feelings about the whole experience. It seemed a little cultish to me at the time, even. I was wary of that, but I was also, I'm fairly experimental. I like to try things out for myself.
sure,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, the type of mindfulness that we practice isn't sitting on a pillow going all day. I think the basic definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, which most people do not. I teach a lot of observe, describe, participate, and what I do is I use an analogy like a football game, and last night's football game was not a good analogy. Uh, However, when I say the observe part of it is when Roethlisberger views the field and looks at the defense, and then when the ball snapped, he continues to observe. Then he describes to himself where everybody's going, who's going to be open, the cover two, whatever it is, and then he decides to participate, either throw the ball away or go throw it to a certain receiver, or in last night's case, throw it to the other team.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I should have told that story about the Kundalini to you, but um, that to me, that was a really extreme measure of, you know, and I think at the time it was, I know Yogi Bhajan started practicing in the late 60s when there were a lot of people doing psychedelic drugs,
Sure.
and like there's even a clip of his students in Woodstock in the film.
Ah, okay.
And they talk about how they're getting high naturally and not taking drugs and things like that. But I think there was a lot of things that make me kind of squeamish or squeal now about like just how weird it was. But at the time, I think it was definitely, I had started doing just simple Zen meditation and I do think that that has had a great influence in my life. And and that came through the artwork as well. Like I was really interested in when I was at the Met a lot, seeing those ancient Chinese and Japanese ink paintings and sculptures. Like I wanted to know what was behind it. Like
Sure.
why was the Buddha like? What was so peaceful about that? What's behind that? That led me on that path of meditation.
Well, it's stopping the chatter. And when I speak at a
Yeah,
lot of rehabs, and generally I tell people that if we pay attention on purpose, life will have some meaning for us. People, places, things will be placed in front of us that if we're there, present and aware, then they'll have some meaning for us. I often say that there's so much chatter going on inside of our heads that creation could be happening off to the side of us and we wouldn't notice.
yeah. That's really what it's all about: is stopping the noise in the head. And when you stop that noise, that's where I think all creativity comes from: the silence, the quiet, the space.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I got into nature. I mean, I didn't grow up spending time in nature at all. And I had a dog who really was my spiritual trainer too, because my dog loved, I would take walks with my dog in nature for hours and hours and watch him just interacting. And I used to let him off his leash and just let him run. And I mean, he was trained very well. He never ran away or anything. And he would flesh out birds, and he would, I would just it was kind of like a nature guide. And he really brought the silence and the beauty and the awe of nature to my life.
Well, what we help people do, David, is figure out what's important, as because most things are not, uh, and we get really to choose. So sometimes what I'll ask people, David, is uh, I'll say, if everything were taken away from you, your health, money, whatever that you have, who'd be standing with you at the end? Who would never leave you? And then I'll ask a person, who do you trust so much in your life that if they said fall, you'd fall without hesitation because you're certain that they would catch you? I said, those are the relationships you want to add to and reinforce. Most people in our lives, David, are acquaintances. A lot of people, I'll call them friends of commonality. And then after that commonality's over, like maybe a work experience, golf team, whatever, then there's no animosity or ill will. The currents in life just go in other directions. But the people, those type of people, what I call 3 a.m. friends, people that would jump out of their bed to come literally and or figuratively to help you at 3 a.m., that's important. And if you have a few of those in your life, you're consider yourself extremely fortunate.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you.
Absolutely. So as you evolved in your life, it sounds like you've had a lot of really experiences that have shaped you. And remember, not all experiences are wonderful and pleasant. It's just sometimes in the 12-step world, people will say, well, I don't know what to do. And then we'll kind of gently challenge them and say, well, do you know what not to do?
Hmm.
Most people, David, know what not to do.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do any kind of 12-step program, but I definitely, have. There have been times in my life when I definitely, had to deal with my addictions,
Mm-hmm.
to drinking and to smoking, um, you know, and I definitely understand that whole world. And growing up in it, it was, it's pretty normal to me growing up. Um, and But and I think even my spiritual pursuits became an addiction, to me for a while, and I recognize that now, Um, but at the time too, I think, I thought, well, it's better to be addicted to something that's not hurting me. It's something positive than to be addicted to something that could potentially hurt me.
Well, you can have an addictive personality without drugs or alcohol or gambling
Yes,
involved.
yeah,
And 12-step recovery is about having a change in your thoughts and a change in your actions. It's about
yeah.
behavioral change. The first step's the only one that mentions addiction.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.